All right, so welcome everyone to our book event tonight with Francesca Lynn Arnoldy, the author of Living Fully and Dying Prepared, an essential workbook to help you reflect back, plan ahead, and find peace on your journey. And it's the Death Doula's Guide to Living Fully and Dying Prepared. And so welcome, Francesca, and thank you so much for joining us and being our guide tonight through your wonderful workbook.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Wyatt. It's lovely to be with you, Karen, as always, and lovely to see all of you. I see some familiar faces and some maybe new names and faces, and it's just wonderful to see the interest and the willingness to lean into a topic like this and to show up for it. So thank you, and I applaud you. I think, Karen, we have an hour. Is that what we planned? Yeah. Okay. So we have an hour. So I created, because there was such a beautiful group of people, a lot of interest, I decided to create something special for tonight just for you. And I will be gifting it to you and then sending it out more widely after this. But it's a tip sheet for the book. So in a minute, I'll go into the tip sheet and I'll show it to you, show you how to get it, which is just right on my website. I put up a new page today for this, and we'll go through it together. And then I thought that we would also spend some time, because this is a book club, having a little bit of Q&A. And if you have questions on your mind, and I could help answer them, or other people in this group potentially, and also just me wanting to hear about your reactions and responses as readers, if you have actually read the book. So that's what I was thinking that we would do. If we are not already familiar with one another, just a quick brief bio on me. My name is Francesca. I call myself a community doula, and that's because it's a wider umbrella term for me. I started in the birth world as a postpartum doula, supporting families that were welcoming a new baby, and then became a childbirth preparation class teacher, and also a labor and birth doula. And then my mind and heart were swayed to actually think about the other threshold in life following a number of losses that we experienced personally. I completed a hospice volunteer training program, and I still do hospice volunteering. I was actually supposed to meet with someone today, but it fell through because she needed some symptom management. But I still do that work sort of when I can, when my calendar allows for it, and when the call, the need really is a good match for my skill set. And thankfully, we have a wonderful local hospice that they really take their time to get to know the volunteers and really capitalize on what we do best and what we find most meaning in to match us up with people. So love that work. And then I am a private practice doula as well in my community. So I serve people who live within basically my county in person, and then potentially other people beyond that virtually if they want to meet up online, if they want phone or email support. I've done some of that as well. I generally work with one person at a time because that's what my calendar can allow for. So I'm working with a client. I've been working with her since, I think it was May or June, and our time is actually winding down. So I myself, as a doula and as a human, am going through my own process of anticipatory grief and preparing myself to be her client through the very end, and all of that it entails. So it's beautiful work. I find it to be an incredible privilege. I created the End of Life Doula Training Program at the University of Vermont. I know some of us are connected through that. I teach as part of the Art of Dying Institute's Thanatology program. I do that. I've been doing that for years now. So it's usually twice a year that they run that program, and they have a bunch of different teachers, and we work together to focus on different topic areas, which is lovely. And then I do some of my own events. I run retreats, immersions, weekend immersions. I have one coming up in LA in March. If you are on the West Coast, I'm really excited. I'm partnering with Death Doula LA, Jill Shock. And then I have a retreat in Florida coming up in May for women. It's inspired ideation. So it's people who are working on a creative project. It's a small retreat. I'm teaching at the Omega Institute in June, running my death journaling retreat there. And I ran a retreat in Portugal back in October, November. I don't know if I have any of my retreaters here today, but it was just beautiful, just amazing to be abroad, to be fully immersed in this wonderful culture and in this death journaling work. So that is a bit about me. I also work part-time at the Vermont Conversation Lab doing some research focused on story listening. So I like variety, if you can't tell, and I'm super energized by my work. I just find it's just such an honor to be a doula, to be in community with people like you, to know that there are others who are interested in promoting ideas like death literacy, which we're going to talk about, and healthy preparedness, and resources like this workbook. So lovely to be here with you. I wrote this book. It came out in July. I wrote this book because I wanted to just sort of dump my doula bag out into a comprehensive tool for people. Now, it can speak to an individual mortal, or it could also speak to somebody who's working in death care, somebody who's volunteering in death care. By that, I mean palliative care, hospice, a death doula, but I also mean grief as well. It could speak to someone who is supporting another person in their life personally through the end of life journey. So I wanted it to reach all of those different audiences and hopefully provide a lot of benefit and confidence and courage, and to promote the idea of leading with compassion without depleting ourselves. So those are my ultimate goals with this book. I just want to ask in the chat. I see people are coming in from all over, which is so fun. Love that, even abroad, out of the country, which is great. I wanted to ask, before I go into the tip sheet, since it's a book club, just curious, have you read the book yet? Are you currently reading the book? Or are you here because you're curious and wanted to learn more about it? I see Stephanie holding it up. That's fun. Thank you. So just drop it in the chat and let me know. Did you read it? Are you in the middle of it, beginning, end? And then, or you're curious. Wonderful. Awesome. And just to let you know, it's available. Ooh, read it 2 times. Good for you. Read it, own it. Wonderful. Currently reading. So oh, good. Reading now in the beginning. Now, what I want to let you know is what I've heard from people, and some of you might be able to attest, that this book, it's 200 pages, which doesn't seem like that daunting. But because it's interactive, because it has so many exercises and so many juicy prompts throughout, it actually is quite an endeavor to work through it. So what I've heard from people is some of the readers are initially going through and simply reading the book. And then they're taking a second pass after they know everything that it includes. Then they're taking a second pass and they're deciding to jump in wherever they feel called and to start working through some of the sections, some of the exercises, some of the prompts. So any of you out there that did that, or did you jump right in and start working on stuff? Love to hear. Yeah, great. Awesome, Cynthia. Awesome. And I love that, jumped all around. Good for you, Wendy. I definitely encourage that. All right, so just that helps me kind of with my mindset and frame of mind as I'm going to share my screen and go through this tip sheet, because it's helpful to know kind of where you guys are all at with it right now. So here's the tip sheet, and this is just an image that we're going to go through, and then I'll show you like the page that's really easy to get to on my website. So this is the tip sheet. And where I want to start, is it coming up for everybody? Okay, good. So what I want to start with always would be opening questions. And that allows us to really narrow in, focus in on you. So as you begin to go through this tip sheet and think about this from your own lens, from your own perspective, you might be a person who's going to be supporting others through the workbook. Maybe you're a care provider, you're a volunteer, or you want to lead an educational series in your community, or you might be working through it as a mortal. I always encourage people to do the work yourself first before you extend it outward. It makes for a much more genuine process when you are going to be holding somebody else's hand through it, even though that process is going to be their own. It's going to be unique. It's going to be different from yours. It really does help you to have a deeper understanding of the work if you've done it yourself first. So sort of thinking about yourself as a mortal, as a person, as a human being, the opening questions would be, where do I want to start? Do you even know? Do you not know? Is this very clear? Is it sort of loose? Is it gray? And then where do I want to end up? Do you have an end goal in mind? Like Karen said, she is wanting to get through and work through this book bit by bit this year. That is her end goal. She's going to complete it by the end of 2024. So maybe you have something similar in mind. Maybe you want to make sure that you're covering one particular segment and that's your goal, and anything else is icing. Whatever it is, just trying to get a little more clarity. And then who is my death journal for? So I had mentioned death journal, which I haven't really talked about yet. And I have a little description of death journaling. So death journaling is a term that I use myself that describes my own death journal, which I'm looking at. It's on my bookshelf, which is a wooden casket. It's really beautiful. It's my memento mori piece in my office. And my death journal is a compilation scrapbook that I've been keeping for my loved ones for many years. So since I finished my hospice volunteer training, I then began my death journal because I had more in me. It just stirred up so much. So for my own processing and my own introspection, and also my desire to leave something for my loved ones for when I do die, whenever that happens, that's what I consider to be death journaling. So it's a gentle invitation to reflect back, to turn inward, and to plan ahead with creativity and courage. And so I put the page numbers on there. If you feel like, I got to reference what death journaling is, or sort of refresh my memory, or I just want to know, page 3 and 4. So back to the opening questions. Who is my death journal for? Is it simply for me? That's totally fine. I work with people who are solo agers or who do not have an interest in leaving something behind to others. Maybe they do have loved ones, friends, family members, but they just don't have an interest in that. It's not a pressing need for them. And that is completely fine. A lot of this death journaling is incredibly clarifying and cathartic, even when we do it simply for ourselves, our own healing, our own journey, our own processing in life. So is it for just yourself or for others? Are you really thinking about this as a gift for others? And then the last question in that set is, what is my preferred mode of creative expression? So this is a creative process. And some of us sort of get a little squeamish and we're like, well, I don't really consider myself to be creative. Well, maybe not. Maybe you haven't sort of allowed yourself to be playful in terms of creativity lately, but it's probably still in there, sort of quietly tucked in there. And maybe, you heard messaging when you were younger to grow up, to be serious, to stop fooling around. And so it's just stifled, but it's probably in there. And thinking about for you, what your preferred mode of expression might be. It could be the written word, could be journaling, writing letters. It could be audio, video recordings. That could be a way that you could convey what's on your mind. It could be poetry, creating poetry. It could be collage. I'm looking at my vision board right in front of me, which is a collage. It could be art. It could be music. It could be something else entirely. And if you have other ideas, put them in the chat. the ways that you would express yourself by using your imagination, by tapping into your inner world, your core self, and then sharing and expressing that. So just sort of playing around with some of these questions, wrestling with them, thinking about them. You don't have to have them completely answered, but it's a good way to kind of start up as you're entering into death journaling. And then I just want to bounce over to the right side. So under death journaling, healthy preparedness. So this is something that I talk about a lot. I think is really vital for us. And I think many of us who work in death care, I know Karen certainly agrees with me, that when we try to avoid these conversations, when we try to avoid the reality of our mortality, when we don't put any of our wishes, if we don't document anything, we don't have those conversations with the people that will be caring for us and who love us, it leads to generally a lot more stress and overwhelm at the end for everyone involved, for ourselves and for everyone who's surrounding us. And so we try to encourage people to, as much as they can, not forcefully, but as much as they can, to consider thinking about these topics, having an honest exploration of mortality, of yourself, of your life, and of death itself, and what that means to you and what that brings up in you. And then from there, we can think about, how do we express that? How do we share that? And that's the processing and sort of working through, and the creativity part of it. And then from there, we can shift into more of the preparing and planning, which is the more formal version of documenting. And ideally documenting, but at least having conversations with important people about our hopes and wishes, what we would want to have happen and what we hope to avoid. So the pages associated with that, 21, 22. And then death literacy, I talk about that. I talk about myself as a death lit author because I publish works about death, dying, and grief and mortality, but also because of death literacy, which means regaining, remembering our knowledge of the dying process, and also learning about the death care system, what we have available to us currently in terms of support options and, medical, non-medical, who's surrounding us, natural network, and beyond. So then the other section that's really important in here is thinking about goals, thinking about setting your own personal goals. And as I mentioned, people who talk about getting into this book, they're like, oh my gosh, some of them say it might take me 2 years to get through this thing because I'm doing it very thoroughly, which I love. Other people, it depends on how much capacity, bandwidth you have, how much time you have to put into this, and how much energy, and your goals. So I wanted to give people kind of a quick and easy look at what your goal is and where you could start in the book. And maybe you start and end with just that one section, or maybe you start there and then you feel tempted to go elsewhere. So is it just purely open exploration? We had a lot of people in the chat that said, I'm curious. So maybe you're curious. So you pretty much start in the beginning and go from there. And I encourage people to, if you come across a paragraph, an exercise, a chapter, or even a whole section of the book, and you're like, this doesn't really align with my goals, this doesn't really resonate, skip over it. Maybe it's just not the moment. Maybe you will return to it, maybe not. That's totally up to you. Allow yourself to lead your journey. And then the next goal might be relieving death anxiety. Does the thought of mortality, does the thought of loss, does the thought of death bring up a lot of fear inside of you? That's really natural. So start with that section potentially. Or is it that you really want to heal your past? Then start with that section. And I'll just give you a little glimpse into it. So death anxiety, just going to find the page real quick. In this section, we talk about just coming to awareness about mortality and that process, and then mitigating anxiety. I try to give a lot of coping techniques and different philosophies and approaches to be able to handle this. the idea of non-existence, different works, historically looking back on things, a balanced view. Sort of how do you work with that? How do you integrate that kind of reality? What do you do with it in your life now? And then healing the past, I go into some expressive writing, and it's really about you. It's about unburdening yourself from some heaviness and pain that you may be carrying from past decades, past relationships, past hardships that maybe haven't been fully healed. Not that we ever sort of like graduate in healing. It's an ongoing process, but maybe if there's something that really hasn't been looked at and you feel a sense of readiness to revisit that, it's for your own sake, it's for your own clarity and your own healing. So throughout that section, I have some rituals and how to plan them. And that's a way of releasing and unburdening. And there could be letters to yourself. There could be letters to others in this process. Those letters might not ever be shared. They might not ever be seen by anybody else. They might not be sent. They might even be written to people who are no longer living or who would not be willing to hear what you have to say. But again, this is for you. It's for your own process, your own healing. And then it could be reflecting back, which has more to do with a life review. And those of us who work in death care, we're pretty familiar with what that means. But just in general, it means reminiscing. It means thinking back on your days and on your years. In my work as a doula, generally this starts more informally. People are just wanting to tell me stories about who they've been, where they've been, who they've been connected to, their highlights, and also regrets, heartbreaks, the whole mess of it. From there, we might decide to do a life review that leads to a legacy project or a remembrance gift, which is down further on this list. But it could be that we capture it in some sort of form. So it could be written, or it could be an audio video recording, or a combination of those things. It could be a letter to just one person. And also it could be that you reflect on certain parts of your life for yourself, and you might write down a timeline, or I break it up in a couple different ways. So it could be by decades, it could be by eras. Some people pick and choose, and they only really want to revisit certain parts, certain periods of their past, and other people want the sort of like run the full gamut, do the whole thing. For some people, they want to share it, other people don't. So this part of the workbook really takes you through that with lots of prompts and different approaches. And then turning inward, this is more about your core self and who you really are and exploring that. So this one, I feel like if you're looking for a lighter entry point, one that's not really focused on the end of life at all, then this is probably your go-to. This is about clarifying and sharing your authentic self. It includes a favorites list. The reason that I included that is because in my work, I was supporting a young couple, and the father had brain cancer. And we were doing legacy letters for his children so that he would be remembered, because that was a really heavy fear on his heart. And as his disease progressed, he was unable to continue to even not only write or type, but even give me complete sentences for the letters if I were typing them for him. So we shifted to a favorites list, because that's what he was able to do at that point, and give me one-word answers for most of these topics. So I just came up with a bunch of questions. And in this way, his kids could continue to get to know him as they grew up without him, which was really important. So there's that. There's a happiness is list, which is a beautiful walk down memory lane. I have that in my death journal. And then there's a comfort is list, which I added to my death journal because in case my loved ones are going to be providing care to me, I wanted to also give them some ideas right in there. They're all compiled from many years of just adding things to my list. And it's another walk down memory lane. There's a section about gratitude. There's a poetry section about life, just a simple way to do an acrostic poem about life for people to try out. There's a section about beliefs. And so then we move on to, what was that? That was turning inward, and then remembrance gifts. So sort of like the letters that we talked about, talk people through a lot of different prompts. It might be relationship focused, it might be legacy focused. So many different ways to start out your letter or your sentence. And then additional projects as well, like a memory garden or the death journal that I've been creating, which is just my own compilation, or a cookbook, or some handmade or heartfelt gifts. And then a section about bequeathing and thinking about gifting your belongings to people, either now or in the future, and preparing for that. And then there's the big section about planning ahead. So part of this workbook came from a workshop that I lead sometimes, which is called Working Through Wishes. And I really fleshed this section out significantly in the book. So it's from 135 to 167. And it takes you through the who, what, why, not, when, where, how questions, and then goes deeper into those as well through that. So if you feel called to really start with the end in mind, really start with end of life care planning, then that's where you go to first. From there, you could explore the rest of the book. If you are a death care provider, you're a doula, you're working in hospice, palliative care, you're a volunteer, and people want your support with doing some of that planning in advance, you could start there. It's not your legal or medical advance directive forms or anything like that. It's a precursor to that, and it's really more comprehensive. It's a nice complement to those legal forms. So it's more about you and who you are, what would bring you comfort, what would make you feel safe, who you could surround yourself with, all your senses, and how to care for you in the most customized way possible. And if you yourself are providing care or education, if you're an advocate, then making sure you read that section, page 11 to 16, which is a special letter in the workbook for care providers, and helping you kind of enter into the mindset that's needed and a stance of compassion before you extend this to others. So some reminders at the end here. In the book, I talk about try and modify, and then peruse and choose, and that's to really just personalize the experience. To remember that everyone has unique wishes, worries, and pacing. So often in my work, I talk about how my clients it's not uncommon for them to take sort of one step closer to the reality of their mortality and then 2 steps back, or maybe 2 steps closer and 1 step back. And then maybe they're having this time span where they're just moving closer and closer, and there's this feeling of acceptance. And then other times where they're sort of plateaued, or they're really backing away from it. And that's really natural. That's really expected. So we have to sort of balance that with the mantra that it's really helpful to repeat, which is, it often feels too early until it's too late. And this type of work can really get pushed aside, put on the back burner. I'll do it later. And then sometimes it doesn't happen. So to try to stay motivated without being too forceful, and finding that healthy balance in the middle. And if you find yourself having questions about it or feeling that resistance, to go back to pages 4 through 10, which can help you work through some of that commonly come up for people. So that is the tip sheet. I will stop sharing, but I will show you real quick. I think I have it up here, my website. So I just put this up on my website, and here we go. And I will put this in the chat as well. I'll copy and paste it so that you can find it. When you go here to this page, which is just pretty much the tip sheet, you can download it as an image, which is this first one. So, you could just copy, save as, you could download that for yourself, or I put in as well a PDF version of it, so you can download it and then you could print it off if you want to. If you want to for yourself, as you're kind of getting started on this journey, and or if you are a doula, or you're providing care to somebody else, or you're supporting somebody else through this process, you know, if you have a doula bag or a hospice bag, palliative care bag, you might want to tuck this in. And then it's sort of at the ready, depending on what your client slash patient is expressing. You might be able to say like, oh, you know, maybe we could work through some of these exercises or prompts since this is on your mind today. And it's a quick grab, quick resource. And then I have, if you click here, you can learn more about the book in general. I have a whole bunch of information there. And then I have my email newsletter sign up. If you're not already on it, consider entering your email and joining the newsletter list. I send them out once a month, and I always tell my newsletter first before anybody else about events and resources. I write some stuff in there, and I have in the past, I think I've got some people in the crowd here who have taken the community, what do I call it? A coordinator training. So a community series coordinator training. I've done 3 of them webinar style. And so what I did was I created a 6-week program based on the book. And I have a 30-page blueprint that's like all prepped and ready to go to put in your hands so that people can run their own 6-week series. Maybe because they're trying to establish themselves in their community and they want to sort of build up their reputation, they want to build awareness, or maybe they're a death literacy advocate and they really want to promote healthy preparedness. I was just meeting with somebody who is a hospice volunteer manager. She just ran the program with her hospice volunteers. So people are doing it in all sorts of ways. I have somebody else who works at a library. She just started her series. We have had people do it online, mostly in person. So stay tuned. I'm thinking about turning it into a more comprehensive, longer training program soon, because there's a lot of interest in it, which I love. So I love building content. I love building tools for people, and I want to make sure they get in as many hands as possible, because, you know, I can only reach so many people with my work and it's limited. But if we can get these tools and resources out there, and you're all doing this with your own voices and passions and skills and gifts, I mean, that's where change actually happens. That's the beauty. That's the ripples.
I wanted to chime in on that because I'm such a believer in education, and we need it so much in all of our communities. And the very best way to do this kind of education is one-on-one, just we ourselves bringing our own hearts with a tool like this, sharing our own stories, and just helping other people learn what they need to know. So I love it. I saw in the chat, some of you are already preparing to teach classes based on this book, and I hope a lot more of you will be inspired to do that after tonight.
Absolutely. Wonderful. I'm just catching up in the chat. All right. Mhm. Oh, and you will definitely have, if you couldn't see the tip sheet, depending on your view that you had in Zoom, like you'll have it. You'll be able to read through it slowly and take your time to get through it, and it'll all sound familiar again with what I covered. And Karen's going to send out the recording. So if you want to, you know, listen to me going back through it again while you have it printed off, that's going to be an option as well.
And I wanted to comment, I really like that early on in the book you address death anxiety. And I think that even those of us who are comfortable talking about death in general and working with death, we often think that we ourselves don't have anxiety around our own death, but in fact, most of us do. It's normal for all of us to have a certain amount of that. So I think it's really valuable for everyone to work through that material to address the death anxiety that that may be buried somewhere you may not even be aware of. I think that's a really important step. So I'm so glad that you included that early in the workbook.
Yeah, thank you for your honesty about that. I think sometimes, like if I'm doing a podcast or just talking to somebody, they assume that I am 100% fine with death, that I'm a fan. And that is not the case. I have all sorts of feelings, all sorts of reactions about death, about loss, about grief, about my own mortality. And they tend to come in waves. And I can sort of work through them when it gets really heavy. And sometimes I just have to sit in the mystery or in the darkness or in the tears of it. And I just try to give myself as much grace and permission as I can. And then other times I feel like, just so in awe. I'm just so awed by it. Just very similar to the awe I feel when present for birth. It's unbelievable to be at that threshold with people and anything in between, depending on the moment, depending on the day. Wendy, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, so death wellness versus death positivity. That's similar. That's definitely really related to my feelings about it because I worry that some people might get the wrong idea about death positivity. I really appreciate the movement so much. I think it's so valuable and helpful. And I worry that some people might think that if I'm going to be death positive, it means I have to have nothing but positive feelings about death. And that is not the case. And that is not healthy or honest for most people. So allowing yourself, whatever is arising, noting it, feeling it, welcoming it as much as we can. Okay, so Karen, did you want to bring up anything in particular, or should we sort of open it up for questions and then reading responses and reactions?
We can open it up if you want to. Someone mentioned in the chapter 12 on contemplative planning for the end of life that they loved the fact that you have a list for tasks and helpers. And I think that's really great as well, because oftentimes those of us who work as helpers ourselves are not that aware of who in our lives could be a helper for me, because we're so used to being the helper. We don't really think about ourselves as being the receiver. And I think that's really excellent.
So true. That is so common in our field of natural nurturers. It can be really hard for us to accept help and especially to ask for help. So doing some of that work in advance. And I find that with my birthing clients as well, that sometimes when people just say, what can I do? How can I help? It feels awkward or you feel too overwhelmed or too low energy to even kind of come up with ideas. So if you've thought about it in advance and you have a list, that makes it much easier for people to actually just point to a couple things and be like, you know what, this needs to be done, or the dog really could use some extra walks during the day if you're able to, or I can't seem to get to the post office, or I need a grocery run. And if you have just thought about it, documented it, and keep sort of a running list, it tends to really facilitate that process because in general, people really do want to step in and help. Not everybody is going to be willing to kind of lean into the emotional process alongside you and sit with you during those moments. But even when they're not willing to do that, sometimes they are willing to step in with some of those more practical to-dos that still exist. I mean, life keeps lifing.
And I noticed, Francesca, Leslie asked, my concern is once having worked through the workbook and then sincerely wanting to share this information, how are we then qualified to present ourselves to offer this to other groups, such as a senior center?
I mean, as a mortal, and especially as somebody who has genuinely, authentically done the work yourself, I think you are plenty qualified. I think that sometimes we have imposter syndrome and we feel like we've got to have some sort of stamp of approval or degree. And that's not the case here. You're not dispensing medical advice. You're not providing mental health therapy. That's not what it is. And being really clear about that is so important for your own protection and for people's awareness of what it actually is you're offering. You're humans being human together, talking about being human, and you are well qualified to do that. I do think that we can build up our confidence in terms of group facilitation and holding what comes up for people, because that can be a challenge when we don't know in advance how it's going to unfold. So doing some of that work is helpful. That is why I've done that training with people and I've built out that blueprint and we've gone through like troubleshooting and in advance feeling a little bit more prepared. But I do think that people who have experience running groups or running workshops, lean on that. And people who are willing to get up in front of a group, I applaud you, because not everybody's willing to. Most people are more, they say they're more scared of death than public speak. No, they're more scared of public speaking than death itself, which always just I think is wild. But yeah, so I would say work through your imposter syndrome. What I do for myself is I try to rework that is my deep reverence for what I'm doing and what I'm offering. That's where my nerves are coming from, this because this means so much to me. And I want to sincerely make sure I convey that to other people. So that's how I rework the imposter syndrome in my own head and stay humble. I feel like when I show up in front of a group of people, more than likely they could have a question that I cannot answer. And I'm okay with that. And I can say, I have so many people that I can lean on in the medical field, the mental health field, clients, other people I can sort of draw from other people's wisdom, different resources that I can look into, and then I could bring that back, or I could, follow up. And that's totally fine. It's better to say, I'm not quite sure, but I really want to make sure I get you good information. So let me get back to you.
Francesca, I was thinking also that people could present it as, I would like to offer to facilitate a reading group, and we will read this book together and work through the book together. And I've already done it and had some training, so I could help facilitate it, but I'm not there to be the expert. I'm there just to facilitate the book club or the book group that's going to read the book together, because that takes you away from having to present yourself as I'm an expert on end of life issues. Only that I would be able to facilitate people going through this workbook together. That seems to make sense to me, and not
Absolutely.
and that's a pretty good offering for a senior center, someone who's willing to come in and lead people in reading a book together.
Definitely. And I think about my audience. So I just booked a workshop down in Florida before my retreat with a contact I have down there at her retirement community. And she got the impression after talking to some people around there that, death is probably a little heavy. So how can we frame this in a way that's going to feel very welcoming to people? So we're doing it's a keepsake workshop, and it's really about life review, reflecting back, and legacy gifts and remembrance projects. And that's the focus and aim. And so that's their way in. And then the next step might be that they would actually get the book and they would think about end of life care planning. But first step, what they want to work on is remembrance gifts, legacy work, and life review. And so that's what I'm going to start with. That's where I'm going to start to meet their needs. So thinking about your audience as well. And I've had someone had a book club through their faith community. And so she did that. She was going through it herself for the first time alongside these other people together.
If anyone wants to ask a question of Francesca, you can also just raise your hand and we can unmute you, so that if you want to talk directly to Francesca. But you're also welcome to just type in the chat.
Oh, Monica, wishing you well in your recovery.
Oh,
I'm really behind in the chat, but I just saw that. And it's so true that when you allow other people to help, it brings them joy and a sense of purpose as well. It's a beautiful gift.
I see she's raising her hand in the picture, so you can unmute yourself, Wendy, if you want to.
Thank you. My question that I put in the chat was, can you talk about how you share your feelings to clients around navigating liminal space? That was such a beautiful part. I'm about a third through your book in different areas. But then I said, in a way that's not forceful, but just graceful and gentle. So it's just what's your best approach where to slowly bring in the idea of what this, so people, not all people can, often that's just for us to notice and then to be able to share after. But how have you noticed, and if you have to read the room and meet people where they are, I get it, but how you might discuss that to somebody that's very new into thinking of that's what's going on at that threshold moment. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks for bringing that up. That's something I think you could probably tell through the book that I've contemplated a lot. And in the book, I talk about how it really first occurred to me in my birth work. And so I'll just give a little background on that with liminal space, meaning the space in between. You sort of have this starting point, you have this ending point, and then you've got this really murky middle. And the space in between can be incredibly difficult for people to see through. People get very, in general, people can get really antsy and really kind of amped up and really want to sort of forcefully get to the other side, hurry up and get to the other side. And I started noticing this in my birth work, where when I would be with somebody from early labor through active labor and be right by their side for, hours, if not days. And then when they would transition into the pushing stage, that's when other care providers would come and stay. And what I saw was it didn't matter if it could be a midwife, it could be an OB, could be a nurse, could be a mother, a sister, it could be a support person, could be anybody who's around that has been invited to be in that space at that time. And some people were able to sort of sit on their hands and watch and wait and witness and allow and trust. And other people could not. And instead, they would fill the void. They would try to. They would fill it with noise. They would fill it with instructions. They would be much more directive and forceful and, and tell this laboring person exactly what to do when. What I noticed as I sort of sat back and I noticed this pattern where some people were able to and some people had a really hard time and were so uncomfortable with that. I noticed that what it caused for people was it seemed like it created this disconnect between the laboring person and their own power and their own inner voice and their own inner knowing. There's a disconnect there versus, and I'm assuming everything is going smoothly, right? Obviously, there is a place for intervention and for firm instruction when there's any potential health risk happening for baby or the laboring person. But I'm saying when things are going really smoothly and there's not really a pressing need to intervene. And if you're able to sort of sit on your hands, watch, wait, witness, and trust that really strengthens that connection people have to their own inherent wisdom and strength and to their relationships outward as well and their voice. So I thought about, I'm like, why is that? Why does that happen for some people? Could it be training? It could be training. Could it be lack of experience with the natural process? Could definitely be that. Could it be that they maybe witnessed and have been a part of some really difficult births and so they're scared? Could be that. But I think for the most part, it's that people really are very uncomfortable with another person's suffering. And that makes a lot of sense. We don't enjoy watching someone else suffer. It's hard. We can feel that in our insides when somebody is suffering. And I hear from support people, I just want to take it away from you. I just want it to end. I just don't want you to hurt. I just hate seeing you going through this. And this can happen with end of life as well. And some of the examples of liminal space might even be before that. It could be waiting for news. Could be that you had an appointment, maybe you had some imaging, you had some testing, and you're going to get the news. Maybe you're going to hear you're in remission, or maybe you're terminally ill and you don't know which way it's going to go. And the waiting, people say the waiting is the worst part, that actually knowing, even if it's hard news, even if it's difficult news, can sometimes feel like a relief just because you know. And then you can begin to work with that and figure out your plan and your next steps. But it's the waiting, it's that time in between. And then also during vigil, during active dying, that can be a time where there's less to do generally. There's less caring that we have to do, maybe still a little bit to make sure the person's comfortable, but often the sort of natural process that our body knows how to do this. It's really similar to birth. Our bodies know what to do. And if someone is comfortable and they're not suffering, then to have to sit on your hands and sort of wait and watch a loved one, a beloved, through that, knowing that the end is so near, it could be at any moment, can be incredibly difficult. And so we would call that another type of liminal space. And sometimes there's this urgency to do, to act, to care, to medicate, to whatever, but it's really about seeing it through. And so holding that awareness as we are providing care and support is really important, just knowing that it's very common, that we will probably see it. And then sometimes what I would say is to just try to normalize it if it feels right, and say, you know, it's not uncommon for people to get really anxious, for people to feel like they need to do something, they need to act. To just see a loved one through this is not easy. So just naming it can relieve some of that stress that people might not even know that they're feeling. And knowing that this is common, that they're not alone in it, that it's part of the process, and then sometimes giving them some ideas and strategies of what else they might do in those moments if it feels like there's a good alternative that could encourage that sense of connection to what's happening and to the relationship and to their own sort of inner knowing and their needs, what they need. Karen, I don't know if you want to add anything to liminal space. It's a big topic.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we each have to do our own inner work in a way, you know, to know that we ourselves can honor the liminal space for other people. And then sometimes we bring our own, if we're able to come in and create a safe container and deal with anxiety during those times, our own anxiety, and be calm, we really can spread that calmness to other people, and we can help other people ramp down their anxiety, even just by being present, just by being there and sitting in the space. And I think that's one of the most valuable things we can do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it works in parenting and all friendships. I mean, romantic relationships, being aware of our own energy and how that is affecting the dynamic.
Yeah.
Very true, Jennifer.
Let's see. Anyone else with a question to ask? You can, where is
Yeah,
the,
interesting insights, Bob. Thanks for sharing in the chat, everybody.
yeah, thank you.
Any other questions about the book or reactions people have had to the book, like sections that have stood out or things that have felt more difficult or more meaningful?
And really 1 hour isn't nearly enough time
Yeah.
to discuss the book. So we're only able to do this like overview of it, but because we could obviously spend a couple of months together going through it.
And Casey's asking about the 6-week program. So I don't have any additional training scheduled right now, but I will definitely let people know. So make sure to sign up for the newsletter, because I'm planning to launch a more comprehensive version of it. I've done webinars so far, and there's just so much to dig into there in terms of facilitation and then holding space, you know, building that container for this type of work for people. And there's, I mean, it's a 30-page blueprint as is, and it there's just so much to go into. So if you're interested, definitely I'll keep you posted. Oh, the description of compassion. Awesome. I'm so glad that that resonated, Lee. Thanks, Tatiana. So as my final question, what are you going to do with this in the world, in your own lives, in the world? Not necessarily with the workbook, but just with the idea of death literacy and mortality awareness.
What I want to say is that this has been very enlightening. Living in the Caribbean, there's a lot of taboo about the subject of death, and it has opened up my eyes to the fact that we need to have these conversations, to talk about it, to share information, especially where I've been exposed to people dying and not leaving instructions. And then there's a lot of confusion, especially as it relates to the passing on of estates. And that is one of the challenges that we face here in Barbados. When someone dies, there's no one to manage that person's estate legally in some cases. And you find a lot of fighting, and sometimes it ends up in the law court. So for me, I would really like to be that person who starts a conversation on death education and getting people up to scratch, not only in terms of after they die, but before they die, who will take care of me, who will handle my finances, how do I want my body to be cared for after death. Like I did a funeral today, and the guy was a Rastafarian who had locks, and his sister said, chop them off, just chop them off. I thought that was, if that's my culture, that's who I am, that's how I've lived my life. I think I should be buried that way. I think that things like that should be respected. But here, if you don't have directive, families don't honor how you've lived your life. They just decide, well, this is what I want, rather than ask the question, what would my sibling want? What would my relative have wanted? We just tend to think, well, okay, the body's mine, I'll do with it whatever I please, I'll have whatever kind of service I want. And I remember speaking to the funeral director, and she said to me, oh, he wasn't affiliated with a church, but the sister who organized the funeral decided we're going to have a very Christian service for him. And I found that, for me, a form of disrespect for the person, even though they have passed, rather than honor the person as they had lived, saying, well, no, I want to remember the person as I once knew them, without locks. I want to give them a Christian funeral because they grew up in the church when they were very young, rather than honor where they were at. And with that, I'm complete.
Well, thank you so much for the work you're doing. It sounds like there's a huge need for you in Barbados. So I wish you well. And I think once you start I'm sure you already are building that momentum, continuing to build that momentum and get the word out, people are going to recognize the importance of it, and they're going to want to be honored the way they lived through their death, and they're going to see the importance of the pre-planning. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
My pleasure.
I liked Anne mentioned that the idea you talked about, Francesca, of legacy projects, that's a really good way to introduce something that's less threatening than actually talking about death, but creating something really special that, that will live on for the future. I think that could be a good workshop to do with people.
Definitely. Yeah. There's so many mini workshops within this that are just like eager to get out into your community.
Well, I'm going to throw an invitation out to anyone who wants to get out of the cold weather sometimes. Barbados is just the ideal place to have workshops and retreats.
Amazing.
I think that, yes, it is. It's a great place to come to for workshops and retreats. And I could do with the support in getting death education off the ground.
Wonderful.
Let's go to Barbados, Francesca.
Yes, field trip.
I like that. I know we're like running out of time. Patricia shared, I'll be presenting in the intro to Living Fully, Dying Prepared at a tipsy talk in a local tavern. I love that.
Love it.
That's really fun. That's very cool.
Hi, Patricia. Well, thank you everybody for coming out and for your time and your interest in this. And I'm so happy to get this tip sheet in your hands and to see where you're going to go with it and what you're going to do with the workbook. So I wish you all well. And thank you so much, Karen.
You're so welcome. Thanks, Francesca, for giving us your time, because it really makes a big difference when we're reading through someone's book to just hear from the author, and your tip sheet is really helpful to give us all a kind of a guide for how to approach the book. And I appreciate it so much. So I wish we had more time, but even this hour has been really special. So I'm very grateful. Thanks to all of you who got to listen live. For anyone who's listening to the recording, and if you got turned away, I'm so sorry. Sorry that I didn't realize our registration would explode in a way, and we had so many people. So, but I'm glad at least we have the recording for anyone who missed it. So
Absolutely. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
yeah.
This was lovely.
Great.